All right, so my name is Archana Shrestha. I am one of the co-founders and co-editors-in-chief of the new Women in White Coats blog. And we're so excited to have on this video conference today, Dr. Ryan Stanton. He's an emergency physician in Kentucky, and he's also the medical director for Lexington Fire EMS and past president of the Kentucky American College of Emergency Physicians. He's also married with 2 daughters. He's got a website called stantonmd.com, and you can also find him on Twitter at everydaymed. And we're here actually to talk about the gender wage disparity within medicine. And many of you guys may have seen a recent comment by a Dallas physician, an internal medicine doctor, that's been circling around social media and in the news because of it really kind of got people thinking and got a conversation going about the wage disparities that's going on within medicine. We oftentimes hear about there's disparity in pay from men and women in other fields, but sometimes people don't recognize that it's also going on within medicine. So we wanted to talk with Ryan today and get kind of the male perspective on this, because I'm going to just first of all go ahead and read the comment that was actually published in the Dallas Medical Journal. I believe it was last week or early September. And so here's a comment that the physician had said, the Dallas physician. I guess he actually practices in Plano, Texas. His name is Dr. Gary Tiggs. And here's what he had to say about the gender wage disparity. Yes, there is a pay gap. Female physicians do not work as hard and do not see as many patients as male physicians. This is because they choose to, or they simply don't want to be rushed, or they don't want to work the long hours. Most of the time, their priority is something else, family, social, whatever. Nothing needs to be done about this unless female physicians actually want to work harder and put in the hours. If not, they should be paid less. That is fair. So, those are some pretty strong statements. I mean, now, Ryan, medical schools are 50% women enrollment now. So with 50% of the women, of the students being women, what does a comment like this mean for their future?
Well, I think it means this guy is from the 1950s. That's what it means. He's, and I don't know if he's happily married or not, but he won't be for long if he talks like that at home, because I know with my wife that I would be sleeping outside in the field if I made any comments like that very often. And the issue is, one, he didn't know how big of a landmine he was standing on. I mean, those words, and I would understand if he misspoke, but really what he said really was clearly what he feels, that his female counterparts in medicine are working less and doing less work than the males. And so my class, I graduated in 2003 from the Quillen College of Medicine at East Tennessee State University, and our class was the first one that was 50-50. And now you're seeing all this research coming out that female physicians are having as good a results, or even better, in most of these research studies, finding that the outcomes are even better than the male counterparts. I would counter that, male physicians, we need to up our game because clearly we're being outpaced, because it's shifting this direction, not only because of the motivation of our female counterparts, but also the quality of the care that's being provided. And I'm one of those that I was surprised with this. I've on the computer behind the screen, I've got some of the statistics from around the country pulled up on the pay gap. And I'm actually amazed. I never knew, because I didn't feel like, and I didn't, in the groups I've worked with, everybody was paid the same. And, based on your experience. And so with regard to the gentleman's comments, one, I think they're ridiculous. To say that the pay is different because female physicians are just coming into the hospital and not bringing the A game is ridiculous. It's stupid. Because I've seen strong workers, male and female, every race. I've seen weak workers, male, female, every race. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you're born, the chromosomes that you have, the color that you are. Your work ethic is based on who you are, not on the external characteristics or those born characteristics that you have. And so I was actually surprised that there's as much of a gap as there is. I thought we were a more modern society than this. I thought we were past overall on most educated human beings of using race or gender as a reason to pay somebody differently. My thought in emergency medicine is your hourly rate, the rate you're paid within a particular shop, should be the same no matter who you are. Now, based on experience and the hours that you work. So the pay gap, now if you're saying there's a pay gap based on hours that people work, you know, if I work 24 hours versus 12 hours, or somebody else works 24 hours versus you work 12 hours, of course there should be a pay differential there based on the number of hours. But that hourly rate, that should be the same. And so honestly, right now, with me working 10 shifts a month, I should be getting paid less than the female counterpart that's working 12 shifts a month or 14 shifts a month. But there should not be any difference whatsoever based on any characteristic. And honestly, if you're going to do that, if you're going to go with that mindset, you want to see the research, the females, our female physicians should be getting paid more.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, thank you for sharing that. I mean, so both of us are emergency physicians, and we work, you know, shift work. We tend to be hourly workers, although there are some emergency physicians, you know, emergency medicine physicians where there's like a partnership track and different things like that. But I think that, you know, he's an internal medicine doctor, and, you know, talking about outside of emergency medicine, things can be structured differently. Like people have an annual salary. They're not necessarily paid hourly. But so what's interesting is, and I'm sure you've seen this study too, in the Annals of Internal Medicine, just this past May 2018, they did this really great review where they looked at all the different studies that have come out looking at this wage gap disparity based on gender. And what they found is in many specialties like internal medicine and surgery, general surgery, there is at least a $20,000 pay gap between the male and female doctors in that field. And that was already accounting for the maybe different number of hours worked and productivity. So when you remove those variables and you equalize those, there was still a $20,000 pay disparity in many of the fields. In some fields, it could have been higher or less, but in general, around $20,000, which is huge, you know? And so some of, and in this day and age in 2018, it just seems crazy and unacceptable, you know, to have that. And like you mentioned also, some of the studies are coming out that are showing that women doctors are actually getting better outcomes for their patients.
Mm-hmm. And well, and you look at, so if you look at the study that I saw that showed that Charleston, South Carolina, for physicians has the largest depth of gap, being 37%. Women physicians make 37% less than their male counterparts, number one in the country, over $130,000 difference there in Charleston. You know, and it's one of those things, I feel like that if, you know, when I first saw the study, I thought, well, it didn't account for those other things, such as the fact that the older population of physicians is male and female, so you have a difference in experience or settings or hours. But the study does account for all of that stuff and brings it all that needs. So, you know, if we're counting so we're going to carry, you know, one bag shingles up a ladder onto the roof, on a roof. So no matter who carries it, with their experience, they should get paid the same for that. And that's what we need to make sure. So your older physicians, sure, they should get paid a little bit more than your younger physicians. And those that work more hours should take home more than those that work less hours. But where, you know, what do you have, an X, a Y, or an XX? That shouldn't matter. You know, it should be based on those things, the quantitative data and qualifications, rather than those qualitative type features of that person. And the fact it still exists just blows my mind, that we're paying physicians differently based on whether they're male or female. And I've heard a lot of the arguments. I've heard, you know, groups say we don't want to hire a young female physician because they're going to have children. We're going to lose them for that amount of time. Emergency medicine, that's pretty easy because it's, you know, emergency physicians, if you're not working, you're not getting paid. So it's not like it's money out of your pocket if somebody decides to take time off. And we're seeing paternity leave now. We're seeing more people taking sabbaticals. You know, I'm cutting back because of all the other outside gigs and things that, you know, I'm doing. And so, you know, it really does surprise me, and I would like to. What really interests me is to dig down deeper and to see why that is. You know, those managerial decisions that say, you know what, in my mind, I can justify paying a female physician less than a male physician. You know, what is it in that mindset? What is it that happens that allows that to take place in a modern society where, you know, we have, I believe, one of the more equal societies around the country when it comes to the treatment of males and females, and for the most part, minorities. There's definitely a still significant minority and racial related divide here in our country. But, you know, I think we've made more advances in this country than many places around the world. But clearly this is demonstrating that we have still a significant gap. And so if we take out all those variables and bring it back to you and I, 10 years out from practice, same emergency department, same shifts, are we getting paid the same? And my fight is there's no reason that we should not be making the same amount of money for the same work with the same experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. I mean, it is in fact a law that that you can't discriminate based on gender in terms of pay for equal work. And so that is just like mind blowing how sometimes that very fact seems to be ignored, So I guess, one of the questions we kind of were curious to know is like, how pervasive is this thought amongst male physicians that, women should be earning less? I mean, let's say you take out all the variables that both parties are working the same, the men and the women are like, take two individuals, they're both working the same number of hours. They both have the same experience. They both have the same board certification. I mean, I'm just curious to know, like, some of these things men would never really say to a woman,
Not a smart man.
There's a guy talk, and like amongst men, they will share these things, but they would never say it in front of a woman. But so that's one of the things that kind of like takes you by surprise. You're like, what? In this day and age, people think that, and like, how pervasive is that thought process? Is it a generational thing? Is it just a lot of men do think that? So we were kind of curious to know, like, how pervasive is this amongst, men physicians?
Well, I think the statements that you heard that have made the rounds on social media from the gentleman that used to work where he worked, has since resigned. I think that is an outlier. I think he is way off the bell curve. That is that traditional misogynistic approach that you don't hear typically among educated folks anymore. But I do believe there is some. I think there's still some gender bias that exists. But I don't see it. I don't recall ever hearing a discussion among the groups I've worked with, the leaderships that I've worked with, that anybody should get paid any different other than by experience in the department. So, the discussion. So when I worked for my first group out of residency, I was the medical director there for 5 years. And I think during that time, we actually hired 50-50, I think, male physicians to female physicians, fortunately, because I find it, I find it more challenging. I'd love to have female physicians because of just the added viewpoint, the change in viewpoint, and also the outcomes and everything else. I think it's fantastic to have them in the group. And in emergency medicine, that's a challenge because even though the med schools are 50-50, emergency medicine is still very much a male-leaning profession. And as we get more and more residency-trained female emergency physicians, that's going to be. I think that's going to be a huge benefit to the practice and to the profession in general. But that one group where I went 50-50, there was no consideration of gender. It was basically you came out your first year, this is what you got. Your second year, this is what you got. This third year, what you got. You planed out at the third year. And after the third year, everybody's went up based on whatever the group was going to go up. And the only other difference other than that was whether you took a leadership role in the group. And so there was no difference. In my group now, I've never heard a discussion about a female or a male should or does or will get paid differently. And actually, ours is incredibly transparent. Our group, all of the finances are sent out to everybody. We know exactly how much everybody makes. We know exactly how much you collect. Of course, we're a democratic group, so it bounces around all over the place, and you're paid based on your reimbursement. So really there's nothing. It's based on just who you see and what you reimburse. And so, I mean, I guess that's the purest form of equality, is just getting paid based on what the patients you see pay you. But at the same time, I don't think it's that pervasive. The issue is, I think media picks up and carries a lot of these outlier dramatics because they are dramatic and they hit a hot button issue. And but I don't think it's as big, pervasive among male physicians and those within our profession. But clearly, there is still an issue, in that there is a significant disparity across the country that needs to be addressed. And male physicians, female physicians, all of those in leadership need to be addressing that and saying why. Because it's not fair. It isn't fair for you as a female physician to go through the same medical school that I go through the same residency program I go through, to do the same work, to see the same patients, to do the same stresses, and for there to be a difference based on that. It's just silly. And my wife is a physician, and I don't want her paid any less because she is female.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because
I mean,
in the end, the money that comes into us, it's not male or female. The work that we do is not male or female. I mean, everything we do is otherwise the exact same, with the exception that female physicians get a lot cooler and nicer looking coats than the drab looking white sheets the males have to wear.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's exactly the thing about it, like, I don't know if this physician, Gary, Dr. Gary, if he has a wife who works, if he has daughters, if he has sisters, I mean, just, he may feel that way, but would he want his wife to be paid less for the work she does, or his daughters? I don't know how old he is, if he has daughters in the workforce, or what his family life is like. But I mean, that's the exact thing that I think men need to recognize, that it may not, like, maybe the men seem to be benefiting, maybe they are getting paid less at the expense of women, but that is not fair, obviously. Second of all, let's look forward to, okay, what else do you have? Do you have a wife? Do you have a sister? Do you have daughters? What would you want for them in the future? If they're going to be in the workforce, or if they are already in the workforce, I mean, you would want them to have equal pay. I'm sure you would want that for your daughters. I want that. I have a daughter. And then the other thing is that, one of the things that was actually brought up in one of the groups where we were chatting about this comment is, someone said, well, you get paid. One of the males said, you get paid what you negotiate, and that women don't always negotiate as much, right? So in emergency medicine, it's a little bit different. There's kind of, like you said, a lot of a set pay rate and things like that, but just kind of looking at the broader scope of medicine and all the different fields, oftentimes, a doctor will be brought into a group and they have to negotiate their annual salary and things like that. And so oftentimes women sometimes are afraid to ask. And then also the other side of that is, who's the person who's hiring? A lot of times is a man in these leadership positions. So we need to get more women in those leadership positions. So anyway, go ahead. Yeah, let me know your thoughts on that.
So the question on that, and that's a question I have as well, is that there is a lot of leadership that is male, but what I see with my wife as a physician, that females a lot of times will treat males differently than they do females in terms of that sort of thing. I think there's a potential bias both directions because it's interestingly the stresses that she experiences in the hospital dealing with other staff is very different than what I experience. And it's almost like my kids, the kids around their mother are often act differently than they do around the father. And, I live in an estrogen ocean. My wife, I've got 2 girls, my dog, Lily, she's female. We had 2 cats, and they got excited, and they said, Daddy, we got you a boy cat, so you're not the only male in the house anymore. Well, we took him to the vet, come to find out that male cat was a female as well. So, and the vet's like, didn't you check the undercarriage? It's like, why are you checking the undercarriage of your cat anyway? I mean, come on, we just take your word for it when it comes to the parts of your cat. But, it's, for me, I'm very sensitive to it. But I think there's a lot that we have to look into. I think I think it's a complex, the leadership, I think the negotiation. The question is whether there's some intimidation factor, the male coming into a room versus a female. If the leadership, how much does it make a difference? Is it male because of male leadership, or does a female leadership also still have those gap disparities in their payroll? What are the factors that go into this? And that's one thing about emergency medicine I typically like is there's typically more of a set framework versus other areas of medicine where it can be more negotiable. But we see that, a fair amount with academics, specialists coming in, negotiating their deals. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to look at that and find ways to take our biases out of these decisions. And, and I think that's where this message comes back, is to look inside yourself and say, do you have a gender bias, a race bias, something underneath that is boiling that makes your decision capacity, your decisions different based on somebody's features rather than what we really are interested in, which is their quality education, their qualifications, their education, their experience, and things like that. That's not just in medicine, but across the board. I mean, we see this with race all the time, that, difference in the way people act and feel around African Americans versus the way they act and feel around Caucasians versus other types of groups. I mean, there's a lot of very ingrained biases throughout our culture, that has to do with generations of the way we're brought up. I was raised in the South, but I was raised in Atlanta, Georgia, and I was raised in East Tennessee where I lived. There was no significant, race tensions. Everybody got along very well. There was no focus on males over females or that patriarchal society that we see, but that's not the case if you go in other parts of the country. And so I feel like I was fortunate that my parents raised me as somebody who kind of, in that whole thought of who you are, not what you were born, is the most important considerations. And so, as we move forward, do you look at yourself and recognize those potential biases? And, you can't eliminate everything. I mean, unfortunately, the way we're raised is ingrained in our brain, and that's the way it is. But can you consciously address those biases in order to promote what is right and what is fair? Because, as I say, getting back to it, female physicians are doing the same work that male physicians are, and thus we should be compensated similarly for that work, with the only difference being the experience involved in hours.
Yeah. Totally, I absolutely agree. I mean, to pay differently when all other things are equal is essentially making women second-class citizens, that we, just because of something we couldn't control, we were born female, that, why, that essentially is my big thing, that I think, you can't do that. We shouldn't be treated as second-class citizens, furthermore, doing the same work. For any reason, whether it's race or gender or anything else, all other things being equal, there's absolutely no reason for that. So I think that you bring about a lot of good things. We've got to make sure that people, what do we do going forward here besides just, talking about what this comment was, what can we do to bring about change? And I'm glad that you did bring up some things like really, especially people in hiring positions or leadership positions, really looking at their own biases. But like you said, sometimes it's so ingrained they can't even recognize it. So therefore, we need to have some checks and balances. And I like how you mentioned transparency in pay, because I think that is ultimate accountability of saying, hey, we're paying everyone fairly. You can see that here. And it's all right here on this paper, it's black and white that everyone's getting paid fairly based on the number of hours worked, their experience, and that type of thing, Any other thoughts of things that you think could really bring about the change or really make things, equitable?
Well, I think transparency is trust. That is the most important thing. The more you know, the more open you are, the more responsible the person that's making the decision is, and the more the person who is who's receiving that is not necessarily in a leadership role can trust your decisions and what you're doing, that you're trying to make them for the right reasons. So I feel this is across the board. I think our costs, our prices, in emergency medicine, I think transparency is key. And the government always tries to get into this, but it seems to never happen, probably because once they see it, they figure out how, damning it is when you see what's behind the curtain, how that, that relative, how that sausage is made in terms of legislation and things. But in this thing, I think transparency is huge. I think we all need to be active, not just, female physicians. I think everybody, physician, medicine in general, we need to advocate for physicians. And that is not a gender physician. There's not a an X or a Y on the end of that. It is physician. It is our job, and I think there's a lot of things we need to advocate for. We need to advocate for our practice. We need to advocate for fair compensation. We need to advocate for wellness. I mean, I just finished a podcast right before this talking about, the fact that any other work environment, what we are expected to do when it comes to no food, no drink, and actually having to try to compete when you're going to pee is just ridiculous. And yet it is our job. And like, nobody's willing to say, well, the argument is always, well, you're paid like a doctor, so cry me a river in your mansion. I mean, that's all garbage. I mean, it's so as physicians, we need to advocate for each other. And one, statements like that guy's statements are not acceptable ever. But I would rather have him say those so we know what kind of guy he is. Because I don't want you to be running a sham, to know that. It brings up an important point. He's an outlier, but it brought up an important topic, that there's gender pay inequality. So we have to advocate for that. And I think as males and female physicians alike, we must come together and say, listen, you're doing the same work, get paid based on those hours and based on experience, and that should be based on it. And honestly, I think the best thing that could ever happen in hiring is to have no idea of where somebody is from, what color they are, what gender they are, just basically qualifications to say, and then hire that person. And then you find out, about them. But, there's a lot with relationships that go into who you want to work with and things like that. But those things aren't, and that's why I always hated CVs. I've always hated the idea of a CV, because all it is this huge opportunity to try to one-upsmanship the other person. And those important to know your qualifications, so much of it is just BS. And it really doesn't matter. And, you have these forms that ask, what's your gender? Where are you from? What's ethnicity? What's all this other stuff? What's your sexual orientation? That doesn't matter. And for me, I don't care. If you're coming to work with me, I want somebody who's willing to work hard, to see my patients, provide good care, and to make a good working environment. And honestly, other than that, I don't care if your features. If you show up half male, half female, heterosexual, homosexual, tattoos, no tattoos, green hair, brown hair, red hair, no hair, I don't care, because really we're in it for the same things. And what you'll find out with a lot of folks is once you get past the bias, you'll find out what somebody is really about, and you find out their qualities. And, an example being that recently working with this guy, and he is somebody that when I worked with him initially, with the way his personality was, I was like, oh, he's just a clown. He just goofs off. He's not a physician. Just goofing off. He's not much quality. But then once I got to know him, I'm going to find out this guy had the biggest and deepest heart of anybody you've ever seen. He would go out of his way to help people like nobody had ever seen before. And so once you get past these labels that we throw on people, you'll find out what somebody's really made of and what quality really is. And so you can find you can get a whole emergency department worth of white, heterosexual, male physicians and be just a crappy department. It's not about the characteristics. It's about the quality that you're putting into your department. And that's what we need to look at as medicine. It's not these simple labels that we like to slap on people, which is what we do, unfortunately. But, but looking past that and understanding we have to look deeper. And, if I've always been, growing up from Atlanta, Georgia, for me, growing up, Martin Luther King was huge, being down there with his church down there. It's not by the color of their skin, but the content of their character has always rung true with me. I mean, that's not just color of their skin, but also the chromosomes that their parents passed on to them. And so to me, I care more about who you are more than what you are. And I think as medicine, we have to grasp that. And as intelligent folks, as the top of our college classes and med school classes, we should be intelligent enough to look past these superficial things that seem to continue to be barriers within our practice. And it does not make us better when we continue to make these disparities and labels. It actually weakens our profession and actually decreases the quality of care with our patients.
Absolutely.
Sorry, I got into preaching there. I do that on occasion.
Well, thank you so much, Ryan. I really appreciate you coming on, taking the time to talk and share your thoughts. It was really great. So we're about done, but I really appreciate it. Is there any last thing you want to share? I'm going to just go ahead and tell people your website again and your Twitter handle so they can follow you.
Go for it.
Yep. So this is Dr. Ryan Stanton. You can follow him at stantonmd.com and also Twitter at everydaymed. And you guys be sure to check out an article that we just published on our blog about this very issue, sharing a lot of the facts and the information and all the stats and everything. It's just published last night. So take a look at it today and see what it's all about. It's by one of our writers and authors of our book, The Chronicles of Women in White Coats, Dr. Natasha Sriraman. So thanks so much, Ryan. I really appreciate it. Talk to you soon, okay?
Well, last thing, as my wife teaches my children, and I want everybody to think about, are you filling buckets or are you draining them? Every day in your workplace, every day where you are, not just in medicine, but in life, are you helping fill people's buckets? Are you draining those buckets? Because in the end, we're in this road together. We have a brief life and time on this earth. And so I think the only thing that pays off is, are we lifting up others as opposed to tearing them down? And this issue with the pay disparity is one of exactly that right there is something. Are we filling or are we emptying buckets? And at this point, we can all fight to kind of get us all the same amount of water to carry along with us.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Ryan. I really appreciate it. Talk to you soon.
Take care.
And thank you all for listening and watching.